The most dangerous mistake you can make is believing a quiet man has nothing left to lose. Marcus Carter had spent years discovering that people rarely looked beyond what was directly in front of them. A simple jacket, an older sedan with faded paint, and a calm smile were enough to convince almost everyone that he belonged near the bottom of the corporate ladder. That illusion had become surprisingly useful. At 8 o'clock on a cool Monday morning, Marcus parked 3 blocks away from the headquarters of Sterling Dynamics instead of using the executive garage that now legally belonged to him. He carried only a worn leather messenger bag and a travel mug filled with black coffee before joining hundreds of employees walking toward the glass tower that dominated the downtown skyline. No one gave him a second glance. Receptionists welcomed executives by name, while security guards politely scanned identification badges. Marcus simply smiled, thanked everyone who held the lobby doors open, and stepped inside like any ordinary visitor. His phone vibrated once inside his pocket. He glanced at the screen for only a moment before locking it again. The message contained 6 words. The acquisition has officially closed successfully. Marcus slipped the phone away without changing his expression. Months of negotiations involving attorneys, financial advisors, and investment firms had quietly reached their conclusion only hours earlier. Every legal document had been signed. Every regulatory approval had been completed. As of that morning, Sterling Dynamics belonged entirely to him. Yet not a single employee inside the building knew the identity of the company's new owner. That anonymity had been intentional from the beginning. Marcus wanted to see the company exactly as it truly was before anyone changed their behavior to impress the chairman. Across the lobby, Olivia Carter stepped out of the executive elevator wearing a tailored navy business suit that reflected the confidence she had gained since becoming a senior operations director. Several managers greeted her with enthusiastic smiles as she discussed preparations for the welcome celebration scheduled the following evening. The board had announced that the mysterious new owner would attend in person, but no photographs or public introductions had been released. Rumors spread through every department. Some believed the buyer was an experienced technology billionaire. Others insisted an international investment group had completed the purchase. Olivia enjoyed the speculation. She believed the transition would create opportunities for ambitious leaders willing to embrace change. As she continued toward the conference rooms, Marcus noticed her from across the lobby. Their eyes met briefly before she offered nothing more than a polite nod usually reserved for distant acquaintances. The warmth that had once existed between them had gradually disappeared over the past year, replaced by short conversations, unanswered questions, and long evenings spent apart. Marcus never chased explanations. Instead, he quietly observed how easily success had changed the priorities of the woman he still called his wife. Near the elevators, a group of employees laughed loudly as Brandon Hayes entered the lobby wearing an expensive tailored suit and carrying himself with effortless confidence. He shook hands with department heads, accepted compliments, and joked that tomorrow's celebration would probably change several careers overnight. His voice carried through the marble lobby with practiced ease. Marcus watched the scene without reacting. Brandon never noticed him. To Brandon, Marcus was simply another ordinary face blending into the morning crowd. Marcus took one final sip of coffee before walking toward a smaller conference room reserved under a temporary guest name. Behind its closed doors waited confidential financial reports, corporate governance documents, and a legal team preparing for the official transition. Before entering, his phone vibrated once again. This time the message was even shorter. Everything is ready for tomorrow. The following morning, excitement spread through Sterling Dynamics long before regular business hours began. Fresh floral arrangements decorated the executive lobby. Banners welcomed employees to a new chapter in the company's history, and catering staff moved between conference rooms preparing for the evening celebration. Everywhere Marcus looked, people spoke about the mysterious new owner who would finally appear at the welcome party. No one guessed the truth. Marcus entered through the side entrance carrying the same worn leather messenger bag and the same travel mug that had become part of his quiet routine. He greeted the security officer with a friendly smile before taking the stairs instead of the executive elevator. Along the way, he stopped to help a male clerk gather several folders that had slipped onto the floor. The young employee thanked him with genuine appreciation before hurrying toward the accounting department. Marcus simply wished him a good day and continued walking. Kindness had never required recognition. Upstairs, Olivia stood inside the executive conference room reviewing the evening schedule with department managers. Every detail had been carefully planned. The welcome speech, the networking reception, the unveiling of the company's future vision. She spoke confidently while assigning responsibilities, and everyone listened without interruption. Her growing influence inside the company had become impossible to ignore. Standing only a few feet away, Brandon leaned casually against the conference table with an easy smile that suggested he already belonged among senior leadership. Whenever Olivia asked for an opinion, Brandon answered first. Whenever another manager offered an idea, Brandon found a way to improve upon it or redirect the conversation toward himself. Several employees laughed at his jokes, eager to remain in his good graces. Marcus quietly observed the meeting through the glass wall before continuing down the hallway unnoticed. Later that afternoon, he entered the employee cafe and chose a quiet table near the windows overlooking the city. While stirring his coffee, he noticed Olivia and Brandon sitting together across the room. Their conversation appeared unusually comfortable. Brandon leaned closer as they reviewed the evening program on a tablet, occasionally sharing a laugh that neither of them attempted to hide. Marcus did not interrupt. He simply watched long enough to understand what words no longer needed to explain. His phone vibrated beneath the table. A message from the lead attorney appeared on the screen. The board has confirmed tomorrow morning's emergency governance session. All transfer documents are secured. Marcus replied with only 3 words. Thank you. Confirm attendance. He slipped the phone back into his pocket before finishing his coffee. As evening approached, the company transformed into a celebration venue. Elegant lighting illuminated the main ballroom. Live music echoed softly through the reception area, and employees arrived wearing formal business attire. Conversations centered on promotions, future opportunities, and the identity of the chairman who had purchased the company without revealing himself. Brandon welcomed guests as though he already represented the organization's future. Olivia stood proudly beside him, greeting executives with polished confidence. Marcus entered a few minutes later wearing a simple dark suit that looked modest compared to the expensive designer clothing surrounding him. Several employees assumed he was an invited guest from another department. Brandon noticed him almost immediately. A faint smile crossed his face as he whispered something to Olivia before both turned their attention toward Marcus. Across the ballroom, Marcus calmly met their eyes without changing his expression. His phone vibrated one final time. The message contained only 4 words. The chairman arrives tomorrow. Soft music drifted through the ballroom, while conversations grew louder with every new arrival. Crystal chandeliers reflected across polished marble floors, and servers moved gracefully between guests carrying sparkling water and trays of appetizers. Sterling Dynamics had never hosted a welcome celebration on this scale, and every employee believed they were about to witness the beginning of a remarkable new chapter. Brandon stood near the center of the room, surrounded by department managers eager to impress him. He laughed confidently, accepted compliments about recent projects, and spoke as though his influence inside the company had already become permanent. Olivia remained beside him. Throughout the evening, greeting executives and exchanging confident smiles that did not escape Marcus's attention. Marcus quietly walked toward one side of the ballroom, choosing a place near the windows where he could observe the celebration without attracting attention. He carried no sign of frustration, only the same calm expression that had accompanied him through months of quiet preparation. Several employees glanced at him with mild curiosity before returning their attention to more important guests. Brandon eventually noticed Marcus standing alone. A slow smile crossed his face as he excused himself from the group and walked directly toward him. Olivia hesitated for only a second before following behind. A few nearby conversations gradually faded as people sensed an uncomfortable encounter unfolding. Brandon stopped only a few feet away and looked Marcus up and down with obvious amusement. "I did not realize this event was open to everyone," he said loudly enough for surrounding guests to hear. Marcus answered politely, "I received an invitation." Brandon laughed and looked toward Olivia. "That is interesting. Someone in guest services must have made a mistake. Tonight is meant for people who actually belong here." Olivia folded her arms without saying a word. Marcus met her eyes briefly, silently hoping she might correct the situation or at least acknowledge him as her husband. Instead, she looked away toward the ballroom entrance as though the conversation had nothing to do with her. Brandon took another step closer. You should probably leave before security notices you. The new owner will be here soon, and this company cannot afford embarrassing distractions. Marcus remained completely composed. I think it would be wise to let the evening unfold before making assumptions. Brandon smiled even wider. Assumptions? You are standing in a room filled with executives while wearing a suit that looks older than half the interns working here. What exactly do you think is going to happen? Several guests exchanged uncomfortable glances, but no one interrupted. Marcus calmly replied, sometimes appearances tell only a very small part of the story. Brandon shook his head and chuckled. You still do not understand how this world works. Respect has to be earned. Marcus answered quietly. I agree. That is exactly why everyone should be careful about how they treat others. Brandon's confidence finally gave way to irritation. In one quick motion, he struck Marcus across the face with an open hand, believing the public humiliation would end the conversation once and for all. A sharp silence instantly swept across the ballroom. Conversation stopped. Music continued playing softly, but every nearby guest turned toward the unexpected scene. Marcus slowly looked back at Brandon without anger. He neither raised his voice nor reacted with retaliation. Instead, he calmly straightened his jacket, glanced once at Olivia, and found only silence where loyalty should have been. Brandon smirked, convinced he had established his dominance before the entire room. Marcus gave a small, almost sympathetic nod before speaking in the same steady voice that never seemed to change. I sincerely hope both of you remember this evening exactly as it happened. Tomorrow, every decision made tonight will carry a very different meaning. Without waiting for a response, Marcus quietly turned, walked through the stunned crowd, and disappeared beyond the ballroom doors while Brandon accepted approving smiles from a handful of onlookers who believed they had just witnessed the end of an insignificant man's place inside the company. Marcus stepped into the cool night air without looking back at the ballroom. The city lights reflected across the glass walls of Sterling Dynamics, making the headquarters appear almost untouchable from the outside. Inside, the celebration continued as though nothing unusual had happened, but Marcus knew the atmosphere would not remain the same for long. He loosened his tie, took a slow breath, and walked toward the quiet underground parking garage where a black luxury sedan waited beside the private executive entrance that very few people knew existed. The driver opened the rear door without saying a word. Marcus nodded politely before getting inside. During the short drive across downtown, his phone rang. The caller identification displayed the name of Amelia Grant, the lead corporate attorney who had overseen every detail of the acquisition. Good evening, Mr. Carter, she said calmly. I wanted to confirm that every member of the board has acknowledged tomorrow morning's emergency governance meeting. The transfer of ownership will become effective the moment you enter the boardroom. Marcus looked out the window at the passing skyline. Has every document been reviewed one final time? Amelia answered without hesitation. Every agreement has been verified. The ownership certificates, voting rights, governance resolutions, and executive transition package are waiting inside the chairman's portfolio. The corporate secretary has also prepared the official announcement. Marcus thanked her before ending the call. There was no excitement in his voice, only quiet certainty. He had not spent 8 months negotiating the acquisition simply to prove someone wrong. He had invested because he believed the company could become something far greater than it had ever been. Nearly an hour later, Marcus arrived at a private office several miles away from headquarters. Inside the conference room, Amelia and 3 senior advisors stood as he entered. A large collection of legal binders rested neatly across the polished walnut table beside a silver nameplate that had remained covered until now. Amelia removed the protective cloth and gently turned it toward him. The engraved letters reflected beneath the overhead lights. Marcus Carter, chairman of the board. No one applauded. No one offered dramatic congratulations. Instead, each advisor quietly reviewed the final schedule for the following morning. At 8:30, the board would assemble. At 8:45, the outgoing ownership group would formally conclude its responsibilities. At 9 o'clock sharp, Marcus would be introduced as the sole owner of Sterling Dynamics. Every step had been carefully planned to comply with corporate governance procedures. Marcus signed the final acknowledgement forms before closing the portfolio himself. Across town, The celebration at headquarters gradually came to an end. Employees left believing they had attended a successful evening, although many quietly discussed the uncomfortable confrontation they had witnessed. Olivia drove home later than usual. The silence inside her car felt strangely heavy. Brandon attempted to reassure her through several cheerful text messages, insisting that Marcus had embarrassed himself and would probably never return to the company again. Olivia read each message without replying. She could not explain why Marcus's final words continued echoing inside her thoughts. Tomorrow, every decision made tonight will carry a very different meaning. Shortly before midnight, the corporate secretary sent one final confidential message to every board member. Attendance is mandatory. The chairman will personally preside over tomorrow morning's meeting. Marcus placed his phone on the desk beside the closed chairman's portfolio and quietly turned off the office lights. Everything had been prepared exactly as planned. All that remained was sunrise. Sunlight poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Sterling Dynamics as employees returned to work with lingering excitement from the previous night's celebration. The building buzzed with rumors before 8 o'clock. Some believed the mysterious chairman had already arrived through a private entrance. Others insisted the board meeting had been delayed because the ownership transfer was larger than anyone expected. Every conversation ended with another unanswered question. Nobody knew the identity of the person who now controlled the future of the company. Olivia stepped out of the executive elevator carrying a leather portfolio and a tablet filled with operational reports. Although she maintained her usual professional confidence, she found herself distracted by Marcus's calm departure from the ballroom the night before. His final words refused to leave her thoughts. She told herself they had been nothing more than empty pride from a man unwilling to accept public embarrassment, yet the certainty in his voice continued to trouble her. Brandon, however, appeared more confident than ever. He greeted managers with broad smiles, joked with department heads, and confidently predicted that the incoming chairman would appreciate leaders who were willing to make difficult decisions. Several younger employees admired his self-assurance, while others quietly exchanged uncertain glances, remembering the uncomfortable scene from the previous evening. At precisely 8:30, every member of the board entered the executive conference room on the top floor. Thick folders containing governance documents rested neatly in front of each leather chair. The atmosphere felt noticeably different from ordinary meetings. Conversations remained brief. Even experienced directors spoke in lower voices than usual. The corporate secretary checked attendance twice before placing a sealed portfolio at the head of the long walnut table. No name appeared on the outside. Only the Sterling Dynamics corporate seal reflected beneath the ceiling lights. Olivia noticed the unusual arrangement immediately. She had attended dozens of executive meetings during her career, but she had never seen the chairman's seat prepared before the chairman himself had entered the room. Brandon leaned toward her with a quiet smile. "Relax," he whispered. "Whoever bought this company will be looking for ambitious people. Last night probably helped more than it hurt." Olivia forced a small smile in return, although she no longer shared his confidence. Something about the carefully organized room suggested that every detail had been planned long before any of them arrived. At 8:55, the outgoing chairman stood and welcomed everyone to the meeting. He thanked the leadership team for guiding the company through years of growth before explaining that all ownership responsibilities had officially been transferred earlier that morning. He then closed his notes, looked toward the conference room doors, and smiled with unmistakable respect. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "our new chairman has arrived." The room instantly became silent. Every director stood at the same moment without being asked. Olivia glanced toward Brandon, expecting him to straighten his jacket before greeting the new owner. Instead, Brandon looked confidently toward the entrance with the same curiosity as everyone else. The conference room doors slowly opened. Footsteps echoed across the polished hardwood floor. A familiar figure walked inside, carrying the same worn leather messenger bag that no one had considered important only hours earlier. Marcus Carter calmly crossed the room, placed the bag beside the sealed portfolio waiting at the head of the table, and looked around with the same composed expression he had worn since the beginning. No one spoke. No one moved. The only sound came from the corporate secretary as she quietly slid the silver nameplate into position directly in front of him. Olivia felt the color drain from her face as Marcus calmly pulled out the chairman's chair and took his seat without the slightest hesitation. Brandon remained frozen beside the conference table, unable to understand why every director was still standing. The outgoing chairman smiled warmly before extending his hand toward Marcus. "Welcome, Mr. Carter. On behalf of the entire board, congratulations on completing one of the largest private acquisitions in the company's history. We are honored to officially recognize you as the sole owner and chairman of Sterling Dynamics." Marcus accepted the handshake with quiet professionalism before thanking everyone for their patience throughout the confidential transition process. The corporate secretary opened the sealed portfolio and carefully placed several documents in front of each board member. Ownership certificates, governance resolutions, and the final transfer agreement all carried Marcus Carter's name. One by one, directors reviewed the paperwork before offering respectful nods confirming everything had been completed according to corporate policy. Brandon stared at the documents from across the room as though they belonged to someone else. He looked toward Olivia, expecting her to say something that would explain the impossible situation unfolding before them. Instead, she simply lowered her eyes to the copy placed before her. Marcus's signature appeared on every page. The acquisition had been finalized before the welcome celebration had even begun. Marcus looked around the room with the same calm expression he had maintained since entering the building days earlier. "Thank you all for being here this morning," he began. "I invested in Sterling Dynamics because I believe this company has extraordinary potential. During the acquisition process, I intentionally chose not to reveal my identity. I wanted the opportunity to observe our culture without the influence that often follows executive titles. I wanted to understand how people treated one another when they believed no one important was watching." Complete silence settled across the conference room. Several directors exchanged thoughtful glances. Marcus continued in an even voice. "What I witnessed included dedication, professionalism, and remarkable talent throughout many departments. Unfortunately, I also observe conduct that does not reflect the standards this company deserves. Respect should never depend on job titles, appearance, or assumptions about another person's value." He paused only long enough to allow the words to settle before looking briefly toward Olivia and Brandon. Neither of them could meet his eyes. Brandon finally found his voice. "Mr. Carter, if there has been some misunderstanding about last night, I would appreciate the opportunity to explain." Marcus answered politely without raising his voice. "There will be an opportunity for everyone to provide information before any decisions are made. Fairness requires that every fact be reviewed carefully rather than emotionally. That principle will guide my leadership from this day forward." The board members quietly nodded in agreement. One senior director spoke next. "Mr. Chairman, the governance committee has also prepared the independent operational review you requested during the acquisition process." Marcus thanked him and invited the corporate secretary to distribute the remaining files. Thick confidential reports soon rested before every director. Their covers displayed the names of multiple departments along with summaries of workplace culture, leadership practices, ethics compliance, and internal concerns collected over several months. Olivia's hands trembled almost imperceptibly as she recognized several incidents described inside the reports. Brandon attempted to maintain his confidence, but his expression gradually changed as he realized the review extended far beyond financial performance. Marcus closed his portfolio and looked around the room one final time before speaking again. Today is not about revenge, embarrassment, or personal conflict. Today is about accountability, integrity, and deciding what kind of company Sterling Dynamics will become from this moment forward. The corporate secretary dimmed the presentation screens as the first report appeared before the board. Charts, timelines, employee interviews, and compliance summaries replaced speculation with documented facts. Marcus remained silent while the independent audit team presented its findings exactly as they had been prepared weeks before the ownership transition had been completed. The lead investigator explained that the review had examined leadership practices, workplace culture, promotion procedures, and employee conduct over the previous 18 months. Every conclusion had been supported by written evidence, electronic records, and multiple witness interviews. No recommendation had been influenced by the change in ownership. Several directors carefully reviewed the supporting documents while taking notes. The atmosphere inside the conference room grew heavier with each passing minute. The first section highlighted an increase in employee turnover within departments managed by Brandon. Exit interviews repeatedly described favoritism, public disrespect, and inconsistent professional standards. Several experienced employees had voluntarily resigned despite excellent performance evaluations. The report also noted that promising candidates for promotion had been overlooked, while less qualified individuals with closer personal relationships to certain managers received accelerated opportunities. Brandon immediately leaned forward. "Those conclusions do not reflect the complete situation," he insisted. "Every decision I made was intended to strengthen my department." Marcus looked toward the lead investigator rather than responding himself. The investigator calmly answered. Every manager interviewed was given multiple opportunities to provide additional information. The final report includes all documented responses submitted before the review concluded. Brandon slowly settled back into his chair without another argument. The presentation continued. Another section focused on leadership conduct during company events and daily operations. Security footage, visitor records, and written statements described several occasions where employees or guests had been judged according to appearance rather than professional qualifications. One recent incident from the welcome celebration had already been added to the official record after multiple witnesses voluntarily submitted written accounts that same evening. Marcus remained expressionless while the report was discussed. He did not interrupt, emphasize, or personalize any of the findings. Olivia lowered her eyes as she read the witness statements describing how she had remained silent throughout the public confrontation instead of encouraging a respectful resolution. No report accused her of physical misconduct, but several board members quietly noted that senior leaders carried responsibility not only for their own actions, but also for the professional environment they allowed to develop around them. The independent investigator closed the final presentation before offering one concluding observation. Organizations rarely decline because of one dramatic mistake. They decline when small acts of disrespect gradually become accepted as normal. Silence often allows that process to continue. The room remained completely still. Marcus finally spoke. "Thank you for conducting a thorough and objective review. That commitment to evidence rather than assumption is exactly the standard we will continue to uphold." He looked around the conference table before continuing. "Every employee deserves to know that promotions, leadership opportunities, and professional respect will be based on integrity, performance, and accountability. Not appearance, not influence, not personal preference." One senior director nodded thoughtfully. "I believe these recommendations should be implemented immediately." Another director agreed, adding that rebuilding trust would require visible changes in leadership practices. Brandon's confidence had almost completely disappeared. For the first time since anyone had met him, he remained silent without attempting another explanation. Olivia quietly closed the report resting before her. She understood that the greatest damage revealed during the meeting was not financial. It was the realization that one moment of silence had spoken louder than years of professional success. Marcus folded his hands calmly on the conference table before addressing the board once more. "If there are no further questions regarding the investigation, I would now like us to discuss the actions necessary to restore the culture this company was always capable of achieving." The boardroom remained silent for several long moments after Marcus finished speaking. No one rushed to fill the silence because everyone understood that the next decisions would shape the future of Sterling Dynamics far more than any acquisition ever could. Marcus slowly opened another folder before looking toward the directors seated around the table. "I asked each of you to review these findings because accountability must never depend on personal relationships," he said calmly. "Every recommendation presented today has been examined by independent legal counsel, the governance committee, and our human resources compliance team." The board chair of the governance committee stood and addressed the room. "Based on the evidence collected during the independent review, we unanimously recommend immediate leadership changes in departments where repeated violations of professional conduct have been documented. These recommendations are based entirely on policy, documented performance, and established corporate standards." Marcus nodded before inviting the committee to continue. The first resolution concerned Brandon Hayes. The report concluded that his leadership style had repeatedly violated company expectations regarding professional respect, impartial decision-making, and workplace conduct. Although several projects under his supervision had produced acceptable financial results, the long-term impact on employee morale and organizational culture had been significant. After a brief discussion, the board voted unanimously to end Brandon's employment with Sterling Dynamics effective immediately. Brandon stared at the directors in disbelief. He looked toward Marcus, expecting anger or satisfaction, but found neither. Marcus simply acknowledged the board's decision without changing his expression. Brandon finally spoke in a quieter voice than anyone had ever heard from him. "I made mistakes, but I never believed they would lead to this." Marcus answered respectfully. "Every leader makes mistakes. The difference is whether those mistakes become opportunities for growth or patterns that affect everyone around them. This decision is based on documented conduct, not personal feelings." Brandon lowered his head, realizing there was nothing left to argue. The next recommendation addressed Olivia Carter. The investigation had found no evidence of financial misconduct or intentional violations of corporate policy. However, the board concluded that her repeated failure to address unprofessional behavior within her area of responsibility demonstrated a lapse in executive judgment inconsistent with senior leadership expectations. Rather than recommending termination, the governance committee proposed removing her from executive management and offering her an opportunity to continue with the company in a non-executive operational role if she chose to rebuild trust through future performance. Olivia closed her eyes briefly before looking toward Marcus. She had expected humiliation. Instead, she had been offered accountability with dignity. Marcus spoke gently. "Leadership is not measured only by the decisions we make. It is also measured by the moments when we choose to remain silent. I hope this becomes an opportunity to reflect rather than a reason to lose hope." Olivia quietly nodded, unable to find the words she wanted to say. After the final resolutions were approved, Marcus stood and addressed everyone in the room. "Beginning today, Sterling Dynamics will introduce transparent promotion standards, anonymous employee reporting protections, leadership development programs, and mandatory workplace respect training for every manager, including the executive team. Every employee, regardless of title or background, deserves to be treated with fairness and professionalism. Respect will become the foundation of this company because it can never again depend on appearances or assumptions." As the meeting came to a close, the directors rose from their seats with renewed confidence in the company's future. Marcus gathered his portfolio without celebration or triumph. Justice had not been delivered through anger or revenge. It had been achieved through evidence, integrity, and the quiet certainty that true leadership always begins with character. 6 months later, the atmosphere inside Sterling Dynamics felt entirely different from the company Marcus Carter had quietly observed before becoming its chairman. The executive parking spaces no longer symbolized privilege, but responsibility. Managers spent more time walking through departments than sitting behind closed office doors, and employees who once kept their opinions to themselves now participated confidently in open forums where every suggestion received genuine consideration. The anonymous reporting system had become one of the company's most respected resources because employees trusted that every concern would be reviewed fairly, regardless of who was involved. Productivity steadily increased. Employee turnover reached its lowest level in years, and several longtime clients publicly praised the company's renewed culture of professionalism and integrity. Marcus rarely spoke about the ownership transition that had changed everything. Instead, he focused every day on proving that trust could be rebuilt through consistent actions rather than impressive speeches. His office remained surprisingly simple despite occupying the chairman's suite. Family photographs had been replaced with pictures celebrating employee achievements, community partnerships, and volunteer projects sponsored by the company. Every Friday afternoon, Marcus walked through different departments without an entourage, greeting employees by name whenever possible and asking thoughtful questions about their work instead of expecting compliments about his leadership. Many newer employees never realized they were speaking with the owner until someone quietly pointed him out after he had already moved on. Olivia accepted the board's decision with humility. She remained with Sterling Dynamics in a non-executive operational role, determined to earn respect through performance instead of title. The adjustment was not easy. She no longer attended executive meetings or made company-wide decisions. but she gradually rediscovered something she had lost while chasing influence. She remembered how meaningful honest work could be when recognition was no longer the goal. Months passed before she found the courage to approach Marcus after a company volunteer event benefiting a local community center. Standing beneath the warm afternoon sunlight, she thanked him for allowing her the opportunity to rebuild instead of ending her career. Marcus listened quietly before answering with the same calm sincerity that had always defined him. "People cannot change yesterday," he said softly, "but they can decide what kind of person they become tomorrow. That choice belongs to each of us every single day." Olivia nodded with tears quietly gathering in her eyes, not because she expected another chance at their marriage, but because she finally understood the difference between forgiveness and avoiding responsibility. Marcus wished her well before returning to greet several employees waiting nearby. Their personal journey would follow separate paths, but resentment no longer guided either of their lives. News of Sterling Dynamics' remarkable transformation eventually attracted attention throughout the business community. Articles praised the company's transparent leadership model, ethical promotion system, and renewed commitment to workplace respect. Industry organizations invited Marcus to speak about corporate culture, yet he consistently declined invitations that focused on his personal story. Instead, he encouraged senior managers from different departments to share the lessons they had learned together. He believed leadership was strongest when success belonged to the entire organization rather than one individual. One quiet evening, Marcus stood alone beside the same floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Where months earlier he had first entered the building unnoticed with nothing more than a worn leather messenger bag and quiet determination. The skyline had not changed, but he had. He smiled gently as employees laughed together in the lobby below, treating one another with the respect that had once seemed impossible to achieve. At that moment, Marcus realized the greatest victory had never been buying the company or becoming its chairman. The greatest victory was proving that true character remains steady whether the world recognizes your worth or completely overlooks it, because genuine leadership is never revealed by the power you possess, but by the dignity you choose to extend to everyone around you.